Oh, you can just go ahead and start now.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been recording this whole thing. Not that we'll use it, but
yeah. All right, let's go. All right, I'm recording now, so that's good.
Cool.
Okay,
yeah, I always record the off-pod sections so I can use it for later blackmail against
Compromat, mad compromat. External hard drive full of compromat.
I'd like to push back a little bit on that one. So I'm at Slavoid T.
All right, this is Shit Spouter 37.
I'm Spicy Boy at He Who's Spicy.
This is Black.com pilled.
This is the Fed Post.
So yeah, actually they're thumb drives, not external hard drives. Come on.
I have thumb drives of audio recordings of all you guys just in the walls of my home. Yeah, right. Yeah, it's on every medium possible.
So I guess a good place to start would just be, Siddak, if you could just sort of walk through your piece in the bellows. I think we all have some questions on it, but I think just sort of getting your brief summary would be good.
So my piece basically was about patriotism as a cultural term, and how you don't have to like outright support ethno-nationalism or ultra-nationalism to realize that love for one's country and the sort of attachment one has to their culture and their traditions, so to speak, and the nation state is a legitimate thing to have, especially when neoliberalism is eroding so much of our society, whether it be the family, whether it be like the nation state and so on. So it's pretty logical for a lot of low income folks who've lost their jobs and the families are decimated, they're on drugs basically, for them to keep some sort of whatever they can keep as a sort of form of attachment, and the nation state comes in that. And so if the left claims to be representative of the working class, it has to realize that the working class likes the nation state and likes a patriotic rhetoric, and you can't tone police them into saying, hey, we want to improve the country, we want to improve your lives, but we hate the country. That's just not reasonable marketing, so to speak. And the statistics to back this up as well. If we look at the UK, votes for Brexit, which people in the UK's left circles like Ash Sarkar and Owen Jones were like, oh, this is a culture war and so on. Like, it was not a culture war. Brexit was 100% a vote divided along class lines, because the people who voted for it were in the north, working class folks who want to control the borders. And it's not like these guys are bigots or something. Like, many people, like a majority of Britons are open to taking refugees from Hong Kong if the situation in Hong Kong worsens thanks to China. So these people are not bigots. It's just that they don't want to be part of a authoritarian neoliberal project that takes away their agency and takes away their political rights, which is the European Union. So it was in a way a nationalist vote, but it was also more so, along class lines. And the left kind of, went into its own culture war issue and ceded that entire ground to the right. Because let's be honest, if Jeremy Corbyn wanted to implement almost all of his policies, he could not do that while being part of the EU, thanks to the Maastricht treaties and the Lisbon treaties. Like, that enforces neoliberalism onto every single member state. You cannot have a populist left government if you're part of the European Union. That's a big limitation. And there's an article in The Guardian as well saying that 100% of people in low-income groups in the US, for example, are quote-unquote very or quite proud of their country. So if you are going to market left-wing policies such as healthcare and union rights and so on, it just makes basic sense to say that we're going to help you, we're going to make in a positive way, saying we're going to make America great again. And that's how FDR, if that's what the electoral left likes to refer to as its sort of reference point, if you refer to FDR as your reference point, then he marketed all of these things in a patriotic way, saying paying taxes is an American thing to do, and joining a union, so on and so on. So, and that's one of my main things. And this is coming from an electoral standpoint, because if you are a leftist, your goal is to strengthen the power of the state, because that's one of the main bulwarks against the market and neoliberalism. So if you're going to be pro-state, you might as well be pro-nation state and say that this is patriotism and this is how we define patriotism, which is something that helps our citizens and those left out, get better in life. And this is perfectly reasonable to do that. And if we look at it from the revolutionary sort of standpoint, if you're not an electoral leftist and you completely reject that premise, then even from a revolutionary standpoint, almost every single revolution that's happened, probably barring the Russian Revolution, has been patriotic in a sense. If you look at Cuba, it was a nationalistic revolution as much as it was, led by communists. Vietnam was a nationalist sort of war. It was a war of national liberation against the French, the Japanese, the Americans, and even after the Vietnam War ended, the Chinese. So even today, the Communist Party of Vietnam has its official ideologies as Vietnamese nationalism and socialist patriotism. Right. And even India, it was a nationalist movement, but it was led by a lot of socialists such as Gandhi, Nehru, and to a contentious extent, Bose. So that's the thing. And my thesis in this is that because the left has given up the nation state and patriotism, it has lost elections. And the one example where the left hasn't done that is Denmark, which I use to prove my point, because Mette Frederiksen in Denmark is she's the leader of the Social Democrats when I think the right wing was in power. And the right wing prime minister, I seem to forget his name, called an election. And Frederiksen said, globalization, she said, for me, it is becoming increasingly clear that the price of unregulated globalization, mass immigration, and the free movement of labor is paid for by the lower classes. The result of that election was a thumping victory for the Social Democrats and the left coalition, and the far-right party in Denmark was electorally decimated. They have no seats in parliament now. So if we can reclaim what is ours instead of voluntarily ceding it to the right, we can actually win elections and get shit done. And she's quite a popular prime minister in Denmark. Obviously, she's done some, crazy things which are debatable, but at the end of the day, she's still a left-wing prime minister, sort of populist, popular in Denmark, and she's, pretty much doing well with the coronavirus pandemic as well. So that's basically what my thing was. I added some, philosophical reasons as well. I mentioned David Goodhart in his Road to Somewheres of how, the working class and those, the poor people are somewheres because for them, they are basically they're less educated. They comprise 2/3 of, for example, the UK's population. They live within 20 miles of where they were born when they were 14. They value a sense of being rooted. They value familiarity and security. And, that kind of being rooted to your land is something that answers their patriotism. And if this is what the left should be targeting, but the left is actually targeting the anywheres, as Goodhart defines, which is basically, people who are rich. They think they're they're anarchist in the sense that they view borders as a restriction, and they are support of free movement of labor and capital. And so these are the bourgeoisie which the left should be fighting. But sadly enough, we are the ones aligned with these people, thanks to, people like Daniel Denvir and so on. So we're actually manufacturing consent more for the Cato Institute than we are for unions. So that's essentially my entire sort of synopsis of my article, and I suggest that basically we need to reclaim the nation state, support, immigration restrictions. It's not saying, stop immigration, but if the working class supports immigration restrictions, support immigration restrictions, and also bolster unions and redefine patriotism and reclaim the nation state. Because if you do, you're going to win. Otherwise, you're going to sit there, cry, and be like, "Oh my God, these guys are fascists," and then you're going to be representing the bourgeoisie and wonder why nobody gives a shit about your working class movement, so to speak. So that's basically what it is.
Right. For all your shaming or whatever, you're still not galvanizing anyone.
And as is the case with leftists, you will have lost, but at least you'll know that you were correct in the end.
Right. That's first and foremost priority.
Ideas.
Right. You had the high ground in the marketplace of ideas.
You're pushing the discussion leftward, no doubt about it.
Right. That Overton window didn't see you coming.
Yeah, and I think a lot of, because I used to be pretty rad-lib, and I've had I've always fairly been agnostic on immigration, and I'd say I still am to a degree. Either way, yeah, I feel like right-wingers I've known have brought up how, Bernie used to be pretty far right-wing, not far right-wing, but he was further right on immigration decades ago. And they always bring that up and say, he seems to have pivoted on this. What's this? He's flirting with open borders. Like, what's all that shit about? Because it'd be a big priority to them. And I wouldn't really have a response to that. But
does his old position need to be characterized as right wing though? I mean relatively
further right. relatively.
Sure. I mean,
And where
again,
he is now.
Sure. I don't know. I think that it's like I think that you're right, I guess, with like how we define things currently. But I mean, there's like plenty of left-wing cases for what is it? The whole thing he gets quoted or credited for is like saying open borders is like a Koch brothers proposition.
Right.
I'm like, I mean, that doesn't strike me as a right-wing position. Well, anyways. But at least the way the issue is at least the way the issue's framed right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just mean it on like a relative like continuum. But either way, yeah, me and Slav have talked about on previous pods. There's this conflation with globalism and wokery, where they've somehow managed to frame that all these people getting fucked by these trade deals are bigots, and that's why they're about border security and anti-immigration and all this. And it's just amazing that it's clearly been an economic thing that's been racking them and the same with the people who supported Brexit, the working class there. So it's just funny that all the time there's this defense of globalism from these wokies in like the New York Times. And what it's for. It's for lubricating the system that they benefit from free trade off of and, greases their pockets. So it's always funny that that's how it's been boiled down to in like left-right debate these days.
Well, it increases the scope of their exploitation, like by vast degrees.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really interesting to me, that quote that Siddak put in from the Denmark PM, where she says, "For me, it's becoming increasingly clear that the price of unregulated globalization, mass immigration, and the free movement of labor is paid for by the lower classes," which, I mean, obviously I think is for sure correct. But at the same time, it kind of reminds me of something that Jack was talking about in the last episode, where he was mentioning that I'm not sure exactly what country it was in, but he was talking about the immigrant population in the country and how they feel about open borders, opening up immigration. And so essentially what he was saying is that many of the people who are already immigrants within a country even are typically going to be somewhat opposed to opening borders further, opposed to mass immigration on a larger level, and actually are for more strict guidelines. And a lot of times what that comes down to is because the more immigration, obviously, the more people are on the welfare system, et cetera, the less benefit is for the people that are currently subsisting off of it and getting benefit from it, as well as the more those people are demonized by the people who are seen as more so paying for the welfare system. So because of that, you get within people who have immigrated, into the United States or wherever, that are, in the lower classes that are here because of, more open immigration. They even still think oftentimes that, there needs to be a better solution and not just open borders, because they've seen firsthand what the exploitation levels are when that's allowed to just kind of go on unfettered.
Yeah, and I've always thought that this was the reason why I've been fairly agnostic on it, or just taking a straight materialist stance on this, is that I think it's the trade deals that are the problem. It's not really the immigration that's the problem. That's just, I just feel like a lot of the reason why, I've been, hesitant to embrace a lot of there's a lot of materialist or class reductionists who take a harder right-leaning stance on immigration, and I or make more of a hay about it. And I don't really feel that way, because I just feel like it's sort of another obfuscation, where it's like their concerns are very understandable and it's real grievances that have to be addressed. But I don't know if that's necessarily the solution. I don't know if tightening borders is going to
grievances.
Right.
So aiming at the wrong place.
Right.
The immigrants are definitely not the problem. I'm an immigrant myself. I'm not going to sound like an absolute bigot when I'm, talking about immigration, because I'm not. Essentially, the issue, like you said, comes down to obviously trade deals and wars as well, because a lot of Latin American immigrants coming in are, from countries that the United States has couped, has, done civil wars, and because many Chileans, for example, because I'm from Montreal, many Chileans that live in Montreal are actually so-called refugees because of the U.S. coup that installed Pinochet. And these guys are hardcore socialists and so on. They still retain their politics. And that's the thing. And a lot of these, immigrants, illegal or legal, they come from countries that are, less developed than the United States. That tends to make them much more conservative than most of, the United States, and especially the left that claims to want to support these immigrant rights. So it's not very surprising when you see, Trump is polling well amongst Latinos. It's because he is connecting with them culturally. So like he's getting what, 33%? He's getting a third of Latinos are saying they're going to vote for Trump, which is, considering the fact that, like, considering the statements he's made against Latinos, it should be pretty surprising, but not when you look at it through, the lens that says, hey, wait a minute, like, these people are, conservative. And if they reach a certain income threshold where they, don't need as much government assistance and they, don't need as much help, these people are going to become Republicans. It's just this basic recipe for that's. I think Zay Jelani on Twitter as well posted that a good thing, while a lot of white Republicans were pro-immigration and open borders, was that not only was it benefiting capital, it was because these immigrants were far more conservative and they tended to, help support the Republican base to an extent. But obviously not all immigrants became so well off, and those that did ended up supporting the Democrats. But yeah, that's basically what's happening.
Yeah, it's always like the boilerplate lib argument is like, oh, well, who's going to do this shitty job? Like, you need these people. But it kind of, on its face, I mean, that's like the layman's argument, but it's on its face revealing like that, the libs don't really give a fuck about these immigrants. They're not pro-immigrant. They just want the cheap labor. I mean, it's kind of like blatant. But
exactly. And
yeah,
it reminded me, sorry for the interruption, reminding me of a tweet from Beto O'Rourke when, like, I think it's a bit after he dropped out, when he was like, oh, Trump can't, close the border and so on, because who's going to clean the gardens and who's going to wash the dishes? And it was like, so you literally said you want these people to create an underclass for you, which just represents your own class interests. And,
yeah.
Congratulations, you piece of shit.
Right. Yeah, right. It reminds me of like the thing on I think it was like The View or something a few years ago. I think it was like 2016, like the golden days, right? And like Ozzy Osbourne's retarded daughter, what is her? I forget. Kelly I don't know. Like they all have the same kind of name, right? But like she was like, oh, well, what I would tell Donald Trump, is if you're not going to allow immigrants in, then who's going to clean your toilets? And who's gonna park your car at the valet? And like everybody just like winced immediately when she said that. And she was like, it's a perfect cringe moment. And she kind of like walked it back a little bit, but like, yeah, no, it doesn't strike them as a bad thing at all.
Well, that just sums up the lib position like entirely, like perfectly. It's like just obviously admitting on the face inherent classism, and not only that, but that they're, like Siddak said, that their class interests are inherently opposed to the underclass. And B, they're also admitting to everybody, why is there jobs that people just wouldn't want to do? Like, why is there jobs that no American would want to do and some immigrant has to do?
Right.
Like, why the fuck is that a thing? Like, you should have jobs that pay well, that have the correct protections, etc. Feeling so people would do those jobs. Like, to me, that's the solution, is fixing that, right? Rather than like, oh, let's just not let, like, we need to make sure we let immigrants come in so they can do the shitty jobs. It's like, why don't we just make shitty jobs better? Like,
well, by pay, right? Or by conditions, all that basically, right?
Conditions, pay, all the way around. Like,
I mean, just holding them to an acceptable legal standard. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, like that makes the argument for a labor like party in itself right there.
Yeah, because the whole function is this race to the bottom, where every country, Southeast Asia, like, you're just getting shittier conditions, harder work, less pay, less everything, and pitting them against this other labor, in the Western countries, where it's like, it's the whole function of it, is just to keep. And they're going to move from China to Vietnam. Like they're moving, it's transitioning to other countries. So it's
That's all just kind of tied into monopoly capitalism and imperialism, right? Like Siddak was saying earlier, most of these immigrants are coming from countries like in Latin America that have been cooed by the United States. So it's like you see that sets up a system where they're able to, procure resources of other nations, exert our will from the United States and capitalist bourgeois class in other nations, use them for cheap labor, etc. there, and expropriate their resources, while also sending refugees and creating a refugee crisis that's going to be right to the United States for even more cheap labor here at home, exacerbating the issue, giving rise to more reactionary of nationalism and stuff because of that. That their jobs are taken away, right? Or, this mythical, the immigrant that's taking away your job at the meat packing plant,
Yeah, the blowback all gets absorbed by the right. Yeah.
Well, and I think that like the left case against open borders, and main thing for me just is the labor aspect of it. And when we just completely are just on the fucking on the planet Mars with just some wacky ass opinions about this issue of like it mainly just being like all in favor of this like moralistic fetish
utopian shit. Yeah.
Well, not, I mean, yeah, but also just like this weird fucking puritanical, like remember the whole like that week online where people were like, Jesus was a refugee and an immigrant too, and there were all those pictures. Like, it's just fucking deranged, right?
Well,
and
like
when we
standard fetishization of whatever morally impugned group is hot for the week.
Yeah, like the slave morality of the libs and just their need to, and like their need to make everything like a consumer media product. But like, no, my point is just like if we don't like claim it, you know, as no, like in no uncertain terms, it is a leftist position to oppose open borders, at least given the current circumstances, as a labor issue, then like we're ceding it to, you know, the people that are technically correct about it to be able to paint it as economic nationalism, which like almost like, I mean, probably by design is also supposed to poison the well for any leftist to adopt this issue. Right. And I think it's a similar things going on with like the Democratic Party, you know, flirting with the idea of open borders, and then also, you know, making murmurs about Medicare for all. And so you talk to like I talk to any Republican I know, and the immediate thing that they've already been given is basically, well, we can't have nationalized healthcare because like we can't create, you know, even a sliver of a welfare state because they're just going to have open borders and give it to everybody. And it's like they're both benefiting from this, and the strict, I mean, the whole manufacturing consent of like really like the enforcement is on the parameters of the discourse. No one's being told what to do, but like what is and isn't acceptable is strictly enforced. And
well,
I think we need to like really be concerned with the fact that like we're having the entire issue stigmatized to where no one except right wingers can oppose this. Like, that's fucking nuts.
Absolutely. I think the left position for a better system on borders should be based in the idea of international proletariat solidarity, because of the fact that we're not going to do just open borders to let y'all get fucked just the way that we are, and we're not going to do open borders so that, you know, they can come and pay y'all a cheaper wage and take our jobs there and still exploit you, super exploit you. It needs to, like, you can have a more nationalist kind of agenda, a more logical, common sense type of immigration policy that's not based on nationalist rhetoric from a sense of like phobia, etc. You can also have it based on a program of international solidarity, as this is the best way to make sure that we are providing safe working conditions for everybody and building in class consciousness internationally, is by not letting these corporations, American corporations, just super exploit you down there.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, the race to the bottom thing where they keep pitting labor against each other and devaluing everything. That's the most heinous thing. That's the real menace of it all, obviously, and how that's going to play out in you know, as time goes on. But you know, I think I don't take to that approach, because I think it's idealist in terms of like fostering internationalism or international solidarity, especially right now, might be, you know, I don't know if it's less or more daunting than, you know, a century ago when they were talking about it, but like it's pretty daunting right now. And I look at nationalism from a realpolitik point of view of like fostering solidarity here as a function, you know, as a mechanism for solidarity.
Sure.
So I feel like, of course, with the
nationalism can be used to obfuscate class relations as well.
Of course. So I just feel like if there's just a focus on economic policies for people within the country, if it's based on that, like when I used to be more radical about it, like Slav had kind of convinced me, like, no, this is something that can be used as a stepping stone, and not to be like black-pilled about that. There'll never be this international solidarity, but it is something that might be useful as a way of that's more digestible, more processable right now for people here. And then maybe down the line, it can foster that greater solidarity.
Exactly. It's kind of like, you know, if you think of it as an airplane when you're sitting with oxygen masks, it's like you put your oxygen mask on yourself first before you have the others. Right. And, you know, essentially what it's calling for, it's not saying that, you know, if I'm going to have like a sort of workers' government with this sort of, you know, patriotic leaning to win elections and so on, it's not saying, okay, now that gives me an authority to mask myself as a socialist government, but also still continue conducting coups. That's not what it's saying. It's like, get your house in order first. I sound like Jordan Peterson here. Clean up your room. But yeah.
No, yeah, and yeah, exactly. And Slav is the one who convinced me of this over time. And like, the thing that clicked for me was Vietnam and the domino theory. When there was this idea of like, they were being nationalists as a way of breaking away from colonialism, and it happened to be communist. Like that's just how it played out. And we, in all our paranoia, decided to bomb the fuck out of them as them being proxies for Russia or whatever. But in reality, it wasn't even about us and Russia. To them, it was about them getting their shit together, their own country together, getting some solidarity, some economic establishment just for themselves. It wasn't about all that shit. It could have been the other way.
Their material conditions are far different than the material conditions we're working with today. Like, for instance, they had a colonial force there, imperializing like on their ground. They had still nation solidarity, nation state solidarity in a nationalist way to expel that from them, just like China did as well, like with Mao. I mean, all of those instances of nationalism in more third world countries or more developing nations had some type of occupying force to go against. And so nationalism had a little bit more of they were able to, the working class and the bourgeois, to get the foreign occupying force kind of off their nation by using nationalism as a unifying force for that.
I agree.
Here in America, we don't obviously have an
I think we do.
Force.
I
think we do to a degree.
I think this is a good opportunity to sort of talk about the relationship between the nation state and like the worker, which is sort of what I'm getting at in Siddak's piece, is that the current I feel like the role of the nation state and the role of patriotism is sort of recognizing that there's a certain, the borders of the nation play an important role in protecting the working class in each, and where those previous invocations of nationalism and patriotism were against an imperialism. Now, what I'm getting more from Siddak's piece is that globalization is the main imposing force, which patriotism offers an avenue to unite a working class against some foreign force. It's just not
exactly. So basically, what I was, a way one could frame, sort of a left-wing economic agenda is by, characterizing billionaires not just as, someone we're having a class conflict with, but just someone who is just unpatriotic. And that kind of connects with the fact that this person wants to destroy the nation state. He shipped your jobs away, etc. If you look at Bloomberg, it's a perfect example. He's a Xi Jinping apologist. He's a clear Xi Jinping apologist. And if you can kind of, paint someone like Bloomberg as a sort of, he's a progressive capitalist. And if you paint him as an unpatriotic guy and a capitalist crook, you have yourself a perfect sort of framing of the enemy, the othering that you need to do to succeed in a leftist either revolution or an election. So I think patriotism can work in a good way, and this would obviously, it can help against a lot of the Republican voters as well. If you say, because at the end of the day, we're against capitalist globalists as well. So if you say, these globalists are taking your jobs away, and at the same time you're offering them a bit of that left-wing propaganda, it's without necessarily saying the word socialism as such, you don't really have to. It's an easy sort of way for them to enter your movement where they actually should be, rather than like a sort of neoliberal Democratic or neoliberal Republican Party.
Yeah, right. Go ahead. Sorry.
It also leads to like a fetishization though of like an American business. Right, like American corporations, all American jobs. They hire all these these are our savior American industries. When you try to build that, or it can, it's obviously not the only offshoot, but that's an externality that can pop up from that type of nationalism. I think you can have a really patriotic force, and you can harness patriotism and that need to part of something and build something and belong in a way that is not necessarily nationalistic in nature. I think that a big reason why saying that we need to use nationalism as a tool is because we've failed as the left to provide a better solution and to provide and build class consciousness as a way to that gap and give a good understanding of your role in society, your place with people, and how to build something. And I think that you can do that without having to use typical nationalist tropes. I think patriotism itself is still super helpful, right? Obviously the underclass, it speaks to them as people, the sense of belonging. And, obviously most, in that article, Siddak was pointing out 100% of underclass people say they're proud to be, proud of their country, proud of American, that type of thing. So I think there's a difference between like a critical patriotism. Like I think many underclass people understand that there's also some inefficiencies, right, within the nation state itself, within more so the state, less so the nation. And I think it's important to be able to try to differentiate that, be able to harness that desire for being a part of something, and that patriotism of like being, one of the American workers, being an American worker, being an American underclass person, being proud of what we've been able to do, without having to buy into any type of nationalist tropes. Because like you're saying, obviously nationalism's really like super, that type of patriotic feeling is very prevalent among the lower class. But you also have to think, who does it serve and why, right? If nationalism was automatically going to be a liberation tactic for the lower class, or if it was going to be effective that way, you would think that would have already shown, because of the fact that it's so prevalent within the underclass. I think it could point to the fact that it's a great reactionary tool for the bourgeois to be able to obscure class relations.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, when you can say, oh, like we're all American, baby, like this is a good American industry, they're providing all these American jobs, blah, blah, blah.
That's true.
You think you have more to do with the American capitalist that's running that company than you do with the Mexican worker who was being exploited before they brought that back to industry.
Right. No, that is true. I mean, that's something I always found perplexing about a lot of the right, was why they'd always think that American business doing good has anything to do with them doing good. I'm like, it has nothing to do with you doing well. You know what I mean? Like, these companies don't give a fuck about you. The CEOs don't give a fuck about you. They have no loyalty to your country. They don't give a shit about any of you. You're as useless to them or worthless to them as somebody laboring around the world for half the amount, for half the money. So, I never understood that. But yeah, I see what you mean, that it could be used that way. I mean, I'm less sold on patriotism itself as a tool, because I think there's a good amount of underclass people that don't like this country. I don't think it's just libs and anarchists. I think there's some underclass people here who have, maybe along racial lines or whatever, but don't like this country. And I'm not sold on that specifically, but nationalism as a tool of just like, like what Rebel would always talk about, like, oh, there's like the primitivist thing, like the brain can only handle so many social relations. Like, this might be a way of like limiting the pool of who's in your group, your in-group, that could help foster the solidarity to expand the group, right? Because we used to be, tribes, and then provinces, and then nations. It's fairly recent, fairly modern, and so on and so forth. So it might be a way of us transitioning to greater solidarity, but I don't think we're there yet right now where we could have, where we can process international solidarity. I really don't think most people are on that level yet.
Well, I think reverting back to trying to build,
I don't know if that's classes, but I really don't believe that.
I think just trying to revert back to this purely nation-state solidarity is a step backwards. Like, I think us as materialist people need to try to provide a good understanding and solidarity of class relations. I think that they've done a great job, capital and the bourgeois, of obscuring class relations in this country and getting people to not even understand what the class relations are, what classes we even have, or if we even do have any. So I think that there needs to be a way to correctly define the classes within America, and be able to, or, within the world, specifically America for here, and then be able to build that type of consciousness, solidarity along class lines, even if it is within just our nation alone and not just focus internationally. That trying to ditch class organization for nationalism is not going to be a winning solution.
I agree. I think you're right.
You do both, obviously.
Yeah.
I think you can use nationalism and patriotism as a tool to build that underclass solidarity. But I think that many times it becomes a way to ditch that. It becomes like, oh, this is an easier way. This is what's worked in the past, rather than true task at hand, which is to build class solidarity, to show the class struggle, and to be able to eventually wield the aspects of society that are unhappy with the current way.
I think you're right. I think that's a fair concern. I think, it can be used to obfuscate. I'm definitely more concerned with, I think we're all talking about is like finding that intersection of the underclass and nationalism, finding a way to meld those two approaches.
I mean, I just can't imagine it's a step backwards, given that like it's giving people like a collectivist way of looking at things, as opposed to just like the hyper individualism we currently have. That like, I mean, it's baby's first collectivism, right? Like, again, all of the stuff about like, I wouldn't want, nationalism to eat class consciousness's lunch, like there's maybe an opportunity cost there. Right. And I can't deny that that's like a real concern, and that I don't 100% agree that I agree that like that would be bad. But like I think there's something to be said for the incremental, start the baby out on some patriotism or some nationalism. Also, like there's just something to the fact that like this is just what politics is. Like we're talking about who's going
politics,
to.
Yeah.
Well,
so
right.
yeah, I think it's
but like the reality of
electoral policy. Like I think within left parties in the more developed world, I think that a more nationalist approach would be a winning policy for that. I just don't think that electoralism and bourgeois electoralism, therefore this type of nationalist strain through that process would be getting us towards our final goal at all, really. I think it would just kick the can further down the road and just obscure things further.
Well, yeah, I mean, like in a bourgeois state, like I'm going to make some assumptions that operate under that because like I still want to be as like relevant as possible. But to bring it back to like a previous point that Siddak said, which is just like being able to point elites as like not being patriotic. I mean, someone's doing that right now, and it's specifically Tucker Carlson. Like he's specifically saying that, and he's saying like these elites don't give a fuck about you. They don't give a fuck about this country at all. No,
I agree.
And just it's to the point again that like, why is this being left on the table? Because like someone's snatching it up already.
No, I agree. I think it's a totally useful approach, and it clearly works with Tucker, with Trump to a degree. But I think COH's point, I think the concern is real, is that what if you got somebody who just pandered and virtue signaled patriotism? Because the right virtue signals, they can do that with IDPOL as much as the left can.
Who fucking cares if they're saying it cynically? Like it's politics, baby.
No. But neocons who virtue signal patriotism, like maybe Tom Cotton or any of these guys who are just reptiles. They're just part of the machine, right? And they're they're virtue signaling patriotism and saying all these things and wrapping all these things up. I mean, this is an old tactic. And what if they get some underclass people on board through this this strategy that we're talking about? But when you boil down what's in the nuts and bolts, is nothing. It's just, again, nothingness. Like that is a real concern. I think that's a fair concern to bring up. Like,
I think something that's being missed here, like I think framing like using patriotism cynically is sort of the wrong way to think of it.
It's politics though. Like just the basic premise that like a politician would use something cynically is patently absurd. Like, of course, and good for them, they should.
I just mean the idea that you can abuse patriotism. Like to me, what I get from Siddak's piece is that he's advocating that patriotism is an available avenue for sort of fostering communally based solidarity, and saying that shouldn't be left on the table. And it sort of when I think about Siddak's piece and like what the point you're making about Tucker Carlson is, there are appeals in both, which I think is the driving force behind patriotism, in that it's somehow rooted to the community, to people's communities, and patriotism is one lens of like some sort of solidarity, but based off that communal aspect. Like when he's writing about the somewheres and having a sense of being rooted and secure and having some sense of place and community, I think of appeals to patriotism are playing on that, and that is what gives it power as a tool, not exactly that, it's some ideal form of building some solidaristic sense between people. Does that make sense?
I did. No, go ahead, COH.
I think one of my main takeaways, at least from the piece, and I think this is absolutely correct, is Siddak even mentioned it here as he was talking about it, is for a rethinking patriotism, reworking of patriotism for the left, which I think that is absolutely viable, and that is something that we should do. I just don't think it needs to be done as nationalism.
Siddak, what do you think of that whole idea of like, that there could be neocons who use patriotism as a virtue signal, as a way to continue neocon economic policies?
I mean, they have been doing it for,
it's already happening. Yeah,
it's already happening. Like the clearest example is, the Patriot Act. It's called the Patriot Act. Doesn't mean it's, patriotic, so to speak. At the end of the day, everyone hates it, and it kind of, just goes on with Antifa. Like, Antifa calls themselves Antifa, but there's really no fascism to fight against as such. So,
right.
Names is not exactly the way to go. And in that sense, I think using understanding why these workers are patriotic from a more materialist sense and channeling that, emotion to left-wing economics is basically the avenue I'm more interested in. And just framing, left-wing policies and left-wing economic policies as patriotic and good for the country, and something that is, an American thing to do as such, as FDR put it. I think that's pretty much what I want with it. I don't want any sort of nationalistic wars. I don't want to start Cold War 2.0 with China. I just want to bring jobs back to America and make sure that the American workers are doing well. Because my patriotism, as I try to convey in the article, is more based on class solidarity rather than the right-wing class collaborationist patriotism that they promote.
Yeah, I think also, like, if we're operating outside of our electoral system, and I want to, organize some people in my neighborhood or something, like, I'm not going to organize someone that lives in fucking France. Like, I'm going to organize people that live in the same nation as me. And so, just the basic concept of what we're talking about, the idea that we should be fighting against national identity, just seems, again, like, just so, like, I don't know. Sorry. Anyway, it's like, it just, the argument itself just seems so wrapped up in theory and like what ifs and everything. It just seems so non-practical, like whatsoever.
I don't think there really needs to be an argument against national identity because it's already been corrupted so much to the point where it is. Like, it's just like the family too. Like, there's no argument to destroy the family or to destroy, like, that's a retarded argument. Maybe there's some crazy libs that like think that that's the right solution, but it's like, it happened, right? Like, the idea of the nation state has eroded through capitalism as the family. So now I think it's time to provide a new understanding of it, working understanding of the feelings of community and whatnot through a class lens rather than building purely national.
Yeah, I think there's something. Yeah,
stuff.
I think there's something to the fear that capital has ran away with it so much that national solidarity is it's too late at this point because they've already eroded it so much. And the elite don't operate on conceptions of nations. They move freely around the globe. Like that's primitive stuff to them. Like and they're not really concerned with that. And there's something to be I think there's something to be said about that in the family and labor itself. The idea of bringing the jobs back, that maybe with automation and everything, that it's going to be a world where none of these things are even you're going to be organizing around scraps. Like there's nothing to organize around. Like it's already been eroded so much.
Yeah. The idea that like the approach right now isn't like the most enlightened or like necessary or anywhere near the ideal, I think we would all probably agree on.
Sure.
For better or worse, but lost whatever that thought was.
No, I get what you mean. The realpolitik approach is like, this is what we have right here. Like,
I mean, I don't even want to sound like I'm being like some cold like pragmatist necessarily either. It is also just being like, again, I'm kind of, I don't want to just ramble out my ass if I don't totally know what I'm going to say, but
that's the classic like douche versus a turd sandwich, like, to me.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that there's a time and a place for lesser of two evil things. I think a lot of the time we're talking about that in elections and everything, but I think that that's a reality of life in a lot of ways. And I mean, I guess like I could just like abstain from these decisions entirely when they're not like totally meeting up. I mean, I'm doing the lib argument right now. I totally am, but like whatever. I think that that's fair. Lesser of two evilism is to be unavoided sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why the MAGA appeal rings off so much. It's just this like, seeing the whole country just get gutted and like, hollowed out, and just this wanting to return to when it was like solid and there was like industry here. It's hard to deny that thing, but I mean,
it's a good rhetorical tool. But I don't think it should be like tactical. Like I don't think it should, or I think it's more rhetorical and a good tactical tool, and it shouldn't be used as a strategical.
Yeah, it undeniably moves people. I take your point completely. It is completely true that it might be obsolete at this point, given the current layout of the way capital has just ravaged everything. I take that point. Yeah, there's definitely something to that.
The other thing about that, though, is that like there's a cultural context to it. Like there's a groundwork that's already been laid because this is a concept that's been used a lot. And like neoliberal capitalism just like doesn't produce any culture, right? And so like I'm not sure that there is a tinderbox to light a flame of like a new set of symbols we can share and organize under in the world we have. And so I do think that reaching backwards to something that was already pre-existing doing a franchise reboot. A new trilogy of nationalism. Like I think that there's something to be said for that.
Yeah. I guess I'm still agnostic on this after for the most part. I see both the arguments, honestly. It's hard to.
I just think the only way out is through and not back.
I feel you.
Sideways.
I feel you. No, I feel you. I mean, and the other thing is, somebody who, if we say, Bezos is, he's not patriotic, because he's all these companies as they're leaving, like, they're not patriotic, and then they come back. Is that necessarily, a good? Would then we praise them at that point once they meet that demand that they're back and now it's American companies and they're here? Like, is that really progress? I mean, it's harm reduction for sure. It's definitely harm reduction.
That's what's happening currently. So,
well, I mean, that would still be a win for working class people in a lot of ways.
For American laborers. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, that's and then I feel like at that point we're getting to like is this a revolutionary approach we want here, or is this fighting and scrambling for whatever we can get, concessions to the working class? Yeah, like bringing big shitty soul crushing corporate jobs back to the United States would certainly be in the latter camp. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Much like being gay, there's nothing wrong with that. Spicy, I feel like you've been trying to say something for 10 minutes.
Wait, cultism with being gay, but
Spicy, I feel like you've been trying to talk for 10 minutes.
I mean, I just feel like, I don't know, I feel like we kind of already moved past it, but like the appeals to patriotism, I think, just have to be taken away from the more abstract and cultural realm and really more tied to the livelihood and well-being of, whoever you're advocating for and trying to appeal to with those, with its invocation. And I think when I hear CRK on his agnosticism on whether it's really viable or not, I think sort of what I see as promising in it, the like soft reboot approach of it is not making it the primary focus and trying to build everything around, some sense of patriotism, but more using patriotism to highlight that communities are being ravaged and patriotism can tie into, a more class-based version of it. And that's why I think contrasting it against globalization is good, because globalization, I think, you can obviously, like any concept, it can sort of be contorted and manipulated, but I do think that it does provide an easy way to point out enemies.
Yes.
And, and that's why, again, like I really like the somewhere anywhere concept, because, I've been thinking about like my friends, because, I'm from a city and I have a bunch of very liberal friends. And when I think of anywheres, I think of my friends who are like, oh, I want to like Europe sometime soon, but like now Corona's messed it up, right? Or like, I wanted to go to all of these different places, or I just want to go back to traveling. And, I think this sort of the frame of, this is going to be kind of hard to tie back in, but the frame of patriotism against globalization, I think that those are the people who very smoothly benefit from globalization, right? And they're benefiting from it, makes it so that they're blind to the real problems behind ideas like open borders. And so patriotism against globalization gives a good model to sort of distinguish between like who's rooted and has a real sense of family and community where there's actual potential for solidarity, and who is able to more freely like move around and not really have that sort of rootedness and aren't as predisposed to any sort of solidaristic thinking that could be useful.
Yes. Usually wealthier people, usually.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
I totally
absolutely.
agree.
Go ahead.
I think it should be used as a, obviously to increase antagonization. Like any rhetorical tool you want to use to increase antagonization between class, go for it, right? I just think it should be left as that, as a rhetorical tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't even know if I necessarily disagree with that. Again, on the antagonism, but I don't think that, from what I read in Siddak's piece, I don't think that comes in conflict, because I see it more just as patriotism is an available tool and it shouldn't be ignored. But currently, the left is doing everything it can to ignore it.
Right.
Around.
And that's the other thing, is that like there's a big difference with like the conversation we're having and the reality that nationalism and patriotism just in discourse is treated as what's the phrase these fucking weirdos are using online now? Is like could easily slip into fascism, which like is just obviously like dresses that fat women can't wear. It can easily slip into fascism. Like and it's like everything, like our moments, like original sin in our modern culture being like World War II, and our view of patriotism and nationalism is so clearly painted by Nazi Germany. And then, even more recently, just like living through like the fucking Bush years and how fucking retarded that all was. But like history as a whole, I mean, it's kind of a tried and true tool here.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's used in, right? Like nationalism in Germany was used in a capitalist, like a more developed capitalist nation. That's why when you use nationalism as a tool there, it's more as a reactionary bourgeois tool. That's also how it was used in like Yugoslavia with like Croatia and the Balkanization there.
Well, the thing about Nazi Germany though too was that it's so much more focused on an ethnicity of people more than just like
a lot of that national minorities though, and that's what happened. A lot of the times, that's what comes along with nationalism is an increased pressure on national minorities. The Jews in Germany, etc. Obviously, I don't think all nationalism is going to end up in Nazism. But I just think, when you're saying, oh, you look at the past, it's been used as a tried and true thing, you also have to look at the historical conditions for when nationalism was used in each individual scenario.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, but it's undeniable that there's a lot of third world countries that have used nationalism.
Exactly.
Right?
And they were third world and developing still. Nationalism was a progressive tool in the 1700s. When the bourgeois used it for bourgeois revolutions across the world. It was a necessary step. You're going to have to, like, nationalism and creation of nation states was a big step towards the socialization of labor, because it's socializing labor and production and resources under one giant mass thing. So under in a third world country, using nationalism is for a different tool. It's a different vehicle than it is in a fully developed nation.
Sure. Yeah, like I think one thing I would also want to chime onto that is so there's during the Indian independence struggle, that's kind of where my appreciation for so-called nationalism comes in. The Indian sort of nationalism was more secular and more accepting of every single religion, every single caste, and so on. At least that's what it sounded like. But if you contrast it with Pakistani nationalism, or how Pakistan was created, that was bourgeois sort of revolution, because Pakistan's nationalism was more religiously based, and it was headed by people who were from the upper class compared to India's nationalism, which was mainly people from obviously it had upper class people, but at the end of the day, it was still kind of a more middle to lower class kind of nationalism.
Yeah, it was progressive.
Yeah. So that's basically what my point was, is like nationalism is like the different types of nationalisms, of course, because Hitler's nationalism was ethno-nationalism, and to an extent, that's what Pakistan's nationalism was as well. It was like religious nationalism, but it was a sort of declaring a sort of state for Indian Muslims to not be in India. And obviously, they did a lot of bad stuff to the minorities, and even Muslims themselves. If you like, Bangladesh was created because they genocided like hundreds of thousands of, if not millions, of Bengali Muslims because they were not Pakistani Muslims. So like it was that's what happens when you sort of have nationalism that focuses on identity politics instead of patriotism that's focused on class conflict as such.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think at the risk of maybe sticking on this too long, I think there also just is something to be said for just being so critical of one's own country to the point where you put off normies that you need to probably win over by just coming off as just like a complete misanthrope, which is totally separate from anything we're even discussing here.
We all agree the fuck America shit is just dumb radlib shit that doesn't do anything.
Well, and like really, like that could probably just be summarized with like what we have frequently talked about with like transgression,
right.
of basically being like there's not actually substance or the drive to build here, just more like maybe a kind of a narcissistic display. I don't know. Anyways.
Yeah. But to see what you point about the economic thing, like, there's a resurgence around the world right now of nationalism. Like Bannon's running around fostering it everywhere. Like it's working, right? It's actually happening, right?
It's working for the bourgeois.
I don't know if it's just for the bourgeois, because if there's there's developed nations like Germany that you brought up, like they were getting walloped by the Treaty of Versailles, right? So it's like, we're a developed nation, but with all the income inequality and as this concept of nations are sort of like dissolving away, right, with globalism, you could be in the same country and have so much disparity where the lower rung is almost, I'm not saying they are third world, but they're close to, third world material conditions. So, there could be, even if the nation, the GDP is doing well or whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean that people aren't doing well. And if they're not doing well, I think that's sort of a big drive of this resurgence of nationalism is I think it's like linked 1-to-1. I think the whole '08 crash and the global fallout after that is directly linked to why nationalism is coming back. And Brexit is a good example of all that, of like, they're getting walloped. And, this is the pushback. Trump is the same thing here. It's pushback from the Rust Belt. It's pushback from what, global capitalism has done. And I think there's Sorry?
Trump obviously is not like an underclass revolutionary figure. Like, he's still a contained pushback that's going to still capture whatever that is. And he's going to use nationalism as a reactionary tool to capture that and funnel it back into the bourgeois system.
Sure. But all I'm saying is there's an economic drive for it, because the radicals always want to frame it as like, oh, it's the refugee xenophobia. Like, I'm sure that's part of it. But like, what's the material thing? It's not just people being bigoted, right? There's a material thing of like them getting whooped by trade and free trade and, their economic status declining and everything. And,
right.
Then you get into that scarcity, crabs in a barrel mentality. Like, oh, who the fuck are these people coming in? Then that is more likely that you're going to have that mentality. So
it's at least like a more incentive and somewhat rooted in material identity than race or gender. Just in the fact that it's a lot like a marriage, right? Like, you have your culture. That's the love, right? Like, I have my American cultural identity. That's the love in my marriage. And then there's like the fact that when you marry someone, you also have a financial stake in this relationship with this person.
Right,
and it's the same thing with like, like if the United States went into an economic depression, that would fucking fuck my life up, right? And whatever. Now I'm just repeating myself. Like, that would be some kind of improvement from where we're at now. But
no, I get what you mean. You are economically tied. There's a material basis for you being tied to the well-being of the country. As much as it's dissolving.
Yeah, obviously not like the ideal of like a pure.
Yeah, and I think we should parse out the ethno-state thing with the nationalism thing, because I think Slav, you've mentioned this, or I've just been hearing, like, on the right at least, there's definitely a sentiment of nationalism that's less so focused on race as much as the left wants to construe it that way. But there's way more of a, if you're on the outside looking in, you'll be like, oh, they all just want the white ethno-state, the tiki torches, whatever. And then, but a lot of the discourse on the right is less so about that and more so about national identity than racial identity, especially going to all the Hispanic vote base that Trump has. Like, I think that, like, I mean, like, if you look at like Richard Spencer, like, he's pretty universally regarded as just like a normie bitch who's like pretty much completely outside of any like serious considerations anywhere. And I think that kind of like how, a lot of people on the left have talked about how like the radical far leftists that you're seeing on the internet are really more of just like the vanguard for the establishment to basically prove their authenticity and they're the first ones in and they'll be the first ones to, make all the compromises. And then you get maybe a tenth of what they like, you get what I'm saying? Right.
And I think that like the ethno-nationalists on the right serve basically the exact same policy, except I would say that like they're just the ones that really truly need like a full-throated disavowal by like even their representatives in the political system, because they are so much more stigmatized, whether or not that's like a good thing or a bad thing.
Do you think they serve as like a straw man, like AOC is a straw man for the left? Like, they just become.
No, I wish AOC was more of a straw man for the left, but yeah, that's fucking wishful. For a second there, I heard that and it sounded normal and I felt good about the world, but then I was like, oh right, no, we live in a fucking clown world.
She's not a straw man. She's literally the left, right?
Yeah, I'm talking about like the people online that like I don't know, like the first thing that comes to mind is like, these people being like, I want to get an abortion of like 20 white babies, or like I want to do some fucking crazy, just the gaudy, larger than life weird shit people say to be attention getting on left Twitter, just the weird bonker shit. Which also I think is a perfect segue into talking about China, but holding that for a second. Right. Yeah, I think that the right has the exact same thing. It's just that I think that they kind of like make those people a little bit more remote and they push them to their corner a little bit more. Mm. And I think that those people are like a lot more irrelevant than they are on the left.
Yeah.
Because there still is the cultural shit that the extremists on the left are being tapped for genuinely. And I really don't fucking think is the case with any like actual neo-Nazis. I listen to some right-wing discourse, and like I believe most of these people when they like bitch amongst themselves about how much they fucking hate the fucking weirdo retard white nationalists and stuff. I can believe that when I hear it.
What wing of the right would you describe that as?
What, the ethno-nationalists?
No, the ones who are saying that they're like making us look like shit. The ones who are talking shit about the ethno-nationalists.
I mean, the ones with a public profile that like have an incentive to say something like that.
Gotcha.
I mean, just anyone that wants to get things done, you don't want to be associated with like the cliche movie villains.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah, and of course, like we aren't like no one's really like that with communists because like communists are obviously way more complicated than that. That's just kind of a fact.
Yeah, I wish we would distance from AOC. I mean, the left, but and anybody of her ilk. But
it's so much harder to. What was that?
What's wrong? You don't like skincare advice?
That's actually radicalism to just own your physical appearance. Oh, what a fucking joke! The problem is that it's so much fucking more difficult to articulate why she's a shithead than it is for the really ugly dude with a swastika like tattooed on his face.
Gotcha. Yeah, you're right. Because that one you can say it in a couple sentences. With her, you gotta go a little bit at length about why she's fucked.
And with AOC, you gotta be like, well, here's all this.
You're like, well, first of all, she's a woman. So
how much time do you got, buddy?
Oh, hold on, I gotta make sure my friggin' wife's out of the room before I tell you this one.
But yeah, I mean, we should probably talk about China. But unless there's anything else you guys wanted to talk about nationalism.
Oh, just that like COH is totally wrong. And I'm fucking pissed at him for it.
I don't know. I've got some pushback on that slot.
Pushback. You're first to the gulag when he's up. COH is gonna put you in the gulag.
No doubt.
No, COH is gonna oversee the gulags.
But I'm taking that you mean by the absurd sickos on the left Twitter. You're talking about the cinephile Tanky, right? The ones who,
I mean, I was trying to like tie it in with I think that Tanky shit is also another example of kind of like and of course I'm doing the far from a good materialist here, like I'm gonna kind of get like try to speculate of what's going on in someone's head, but like I think that the Tanky shit is definitely another brand of like American subversiveness or transgression that's like kind of empty. Exactly. And I think that like the purpose of it certainly isn't empty to like bad actors, or not even bad actors, just like people we don't like that are doing the work. And and so like you have like some college kid with like Asperger's like talking about how like North Korea and China is like actually hella based. and they're gonna build their
that nationalism you would love. My life.
Oh, yeah. Touche, man. Touché. Hey, man, broken clock's right twice a day as far as North Korea and China. I'll give them credit. No, and I think so much of it is performative. Of course, like whenever you fucking talk shit on these people, you get like absolute fucking cartoon characters in your mentions.
Swarm, anime Abby's swarm you. Yeah.
Literally, like.
Yeah, no, and none of us will ever be able to just like dump the walls of texts that these people always hit you with but I mean, I don't know where I'm going with this.
Super performative. Yeah, we've talked about it before, like the false binary where you have to pick between being pro that Chinese, capitalist imperialism or the American one. And it's like, it always struck me as like picking between Democrat and Republican. Like, oh, well, they're the lesser of evil, so it's a zero-sum game. It's like, I don't know if I buy that. I just feel like it's just two arms of capital with different aesthetics, with different, different social functions. That's how I've always viewed it. I mean, because tying back to the nationalism, there's this this documentary I brought up before, the Obama documentary with Netflix about the Chinese company coming to America to make glass. And like they took some of the American workers to China and were putting on this presentation, traditional music and like dancing and all that. And they were like getting emotional. They were like, it's what you Slav, what you always talk about, like they were yearning for like some connection for like,
right.
They've been completely, isolated and alienated by neoliberalism in America with the libertarian bent here. And they were just like, longing for that. And, he was telling like some woman who was like performing or whatever, was like, we're all one people. We're all together. Like, it's a very powerful thing, what you guys are doing, what I'm seeing. And she just like, she couldn't like, there was some, language gap or whatever. And she couldn't exactly get what he was saying. And she was just like, oh yeah, this company is great. This company is great. So when he thought like, he thought that, he was talking about everyone, on the planet. And she was thinking that he meant solidarity of the company. So I think that kind of goes to COH's point of like, there is, China, especially like Huawei, the telecom company, like them being very nationalist, like closer to China than our American company's loyalty to America. Like there is a risk of where it's like, you get what you asked for, in terms of their patriotism or whatever, but like, you could see where it's still just capitalism. It's still just boiling down to the same functions and the same shit. But I mean,
yeah, I mean, it's indifferent to like the economic form that it's going to be operating under.
Yeah, and the social form, yeah, it's not really concerned with how that plays out. But I mean, we're all pretty much, I think, in agreement about China. So
yeah, they're great. They're awesome. Fuck my conservative dad. Fucking, I hope to someday, be working in in a Uyghur labor camp soon.
Well, yeah,
that would be based.
Yeah, Siddak, like how do you square that in terms of like, China is definitely more nationalist than America to a degree, but how do you figure all that in terms of like your criticisms of China?
So, I mean, definitely under Mao, you could consider China to be quote unquote socialist. But ever since Deng Xiaoping, in the neoliberal reforms that he offered, China has kind of ventured into state capitalism and to kind of, maintain legitimacy of Communist Party. They call it, I think it's socialism with Chinese characteristics or market. Socialist market something. I can't remember. It's different from market socialism, but it's called socialist market economy.
They workshop the fuck out of that with a PR team.
Like. Yeah, exactly.
Free market socialism.
Yeah, that rings better.
The socialist market economy, I think that's what they call it. And it's basically national capitalism that is, ironically, the populist right, this is what they want. Quite literally what they want. This is ironically, they want to emulate the Chinese economic model. I mean, they are the national populists, as they call themselves, as more statist, more nationalist, and so on. I mean, in fact, I would say these people are to the left of the Chinese Communist Party to the extent that they recognize that income inequality is a problem, because China it doesn't. In fact, China's income inequality is significantly higher than that of America, and that's one of the main issues, especially during Corona, is Xi Jinping is faced with an economy that's stalled pretty much, and he has this massive inequality in the rural areas compared to metropolitanism in the urban areas, and it's just such a stark divide that it almost kind of resembles America with the sort of Rust Belt and stuff like that, and NYC, so to speak. So I think in that sense, China is just America, but more statist. At the end of the day, they're still neoliberals, because if we remember correctly, the last at Davos, Xi Jinping was invited to give a speech on global capitalism and so on, and he gave one to a room full of bankers and elites and so on, but Trump wasn't invited. And I'm not saying Trump is some sort of socialist revolutionary who's against capitalism. He's not. Let's be honest with ourselves. But sure. Xi Jinping represents the market potential for so many companies, and at the end of the day, that's why you have people like Bloomberg bootlicking Xi Jinping. And whether this sort of capitalism is justified for China is a very murky question, because at the end of the day, Marx said that you can only achieve socialism if you've crossed the phase of capitalism, and China was a feudalist society, and it's a really stupid idea to try to jump from feudalism to socialism without even having capitalism. So in that sense, it's necessary for China to have capital, but the way they've sort of gone about it is just completely, different from, in my view, how it should be, because they're not doing it in a social democratic way. They're not doing it in a Vietnamese way, where it's like, Vietnam is still neoliberal, but they retain a lot more of that sort of socialism, and they have a lot more state capacity than China, and I would say even India is more socialist than and less free market than China. And India is growing pretty fairly, averagely for a developing country its size. It's in the trillions, so it's honestly not doing that bad. But China is very, very clearly sort of free market. It's a neoliberal country that's all at the same time very nationalistic and very statist. So, I mean, obviously, like I said, this is ironically something national capitalists and national populists want to emulate, but they would still be far more to the left of the Chinese Communist Party, because they recognize income inequality, and they recognize that, some sort of social safety net and welfare reforms exist. And even a lot of right populists, especially in Europe, for example, recognize the need for, universal healthcare. And so if you look at Marine Le Pen, she is very much a pro-government and pro-social welfare person, but at the end of the day, she's also like, the kind of nationalism that's, questionable. So it kind of just boils down to the fact that, China is in no way, shape or form left-wing. All of their collective farms have been decollectivized, and, it's not even that they plan to, reach socialism anytime soon. It is just that they are a statist, neoliberal country that's trying to form an empire by hook or by crook through debt diplomacy, with the ports in Sri Lanka or in Africa, where they're like, hey, we'll build new infrastructure. If you can't pay it back at these ridiculous rates, then we're gonna just absorb it and make it Chinese territory, and then we're gonna station our ships and take control of the entire Indian Ocean. Or they do it by crook, which is what they've been doing in India with the border skirmishes that we just saw, and in fact in Nepal as well, which is kind of funny because the Chinese helped install a communist government in Nepal by overthrowing the royal family, and here they are stealing Nepalese territory. But of course, because the Nepalese government is in the pockets of the Chinese, they're quiet about it, but the people are they're like, what the fuck is going on? My country's being taken away. But that's basically what's happening. And I mean, kind of going off on a small tangent here, this is where I find a sort of real politic approach is needed, especially with Western foreign policy, of how they should actually try to rehabilitate Russia, because China is encroaching into the Central Asian territories with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, with the Belt and Road Initiative, and it's basically taking away Russian influence from the area, because they're getting the oil, they're getting the military cooperation, and they're getting regime support, and Russia is basically like, hey, this used to be my area, and now it's all China. So, I mean, just like I said, going off on a tangent, if I was a real politic guy in Western foreign policy, I would be like, hey, let's try to use Russia to balance against China in the Central Asian republics. But yeah, that's basically it.
Yeah, it's always mind-boggling to me, leftists who think of China as like, a beacon for leftism. Whether they're thinking on like IDPOL terms or wokery terms, and they've got the Uyghur camps, or economic terms, socialist terms, and they've got Foxconn centers for Apple with suicide nets. And,
suicide nets,
and they're.
And they've even banned unions, so I don't see what leftists are cheering about. Like I think one of the key countries you could actually compare China to is Singapore, because Singapore, I mean, what Singapore's labor policy is simple. It's like they have like one national trade union controlled by the nation, which is, so there's no independent trade unions, but they kind of like have a meeting every year where they sit with, there's like the government, the National Trade Unions Congress, and the industrialists to sit together and they negotiate the wage, which is I mean, not the most favorable option, but still kind of better. But China doesn't even have that. It's just it doesn't have trade unions. It has a so-called trade unions Congress, but if it were to do shit, you would not be having suicide nets at Apple factories.
Yeah, the whole reason a lot of global manufacturing is there is because it's cheaper, because their labor laws are shit. Even like compared to that's the thing. I've always seen them as like almost more capitalist than the United States, which is just, it always just boggled my mind, like the hammer sickle people just like fawning over China because it's communist in name or something, or because.
Well, I mean, again, like I think Siddak like pretty much touched upon that, which is, and this ties back to how we had talked about Marxism in like the previous episode with Jack, is like it's all part of the grand plan, man. Like I have the book that tells me how it's written, and like I know how it's. You're like it's like the dad in Big Fish. Like I know how it's all gonna play out, in the end, right? Like and the thing about that, eggs. Yeah, and like the thing about that is obviously that taking a little bit of that approach is like one of the great strengths of Marxism and one of the things that makes it effective. But also, if you're approaching things, I mean, we had talked about this and COH, harps on the like, you have to be able to be dynamic and react and change in accordance with what the fuck is going on in the time you were born in, you motherfucker. And like, it's the same thing like with China. It's just like, yeah, if you have the playbook, you have the Grand Necronomicon that was written, years and years ago, and you know how everything's going to play out. Like, okay, you can justify horrible shit doing that, right? Like you just became like the AI villain in every science fiction movie, right? Like you're just going off your programming,
right?
And you will just be a fucking demon person.
Yeah, the ends justify the means. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's just this huge utilitarian thing with China. And then, I mean, what you said about like they seem even more capitalist, I think that maybe more just speaks to the fact that like they're the rising power right now, mixed with the fact that the last few decades they're just going through like speed run of like liberalization.
And the imperialism thing that Siddak was touching on is like, with One Belt, One Road, what they're doing, setting up things in Africa and everywhere. Like they're the new, like they're going to do the new imperialism. They're doing it better than we have set it up as far as like longevity. Like,
well, and that's what I was just going to say too, is like, also to make like maybe an uncomfortable point or whatever, but like, yeah, like a lot of, well, I don't know. I mean, there's probably a lot of problems with what I'm about to say, but I'll say it either way. But like, I'm sure there are plenty of examples in what they're doing in Africa that are like a huge market improvement, like across the world and everything, like their huge train project across Europe and everything.
I mean, investment is still investment.
Yeah, it's part of the pitch is like, we're getting all this, equity of your fucking country, but you're getting something out of this, obviously. Like that's the whole pitch is like, we'll help you set up, but we're collecting this later.
Yeah, it's kind of like, oil companies that America has in the Middle East. It's quite literally almost the same thing. It's like, yeah, we'll take control of the oil companies, we'll keep most of the profits, but we'll keep your regime stable, and we'll give you some of the money for sure, and then you can use that to keep your citizens happy. And that's kind of what's happening. That's what Saudi Arabia is. Saudi Aramco is kind of a nationalized company, but the end of it, Aramco has American in its abbreviation.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And I think one of the funny things about this is that, and I know that plenty of people have written about this. I've like mainly read like Zizek talk about it, but like again, like we have a brand of capitalism in the States that is very state capitalism, right? Like the idea that like a lot of people on the right, tout all this belief in free markets is laughable, since like they're operating under an illusion. And the fact is that that's the rules of the road now. And because communism, well, there we go. Because China is coming from, where they're coming from and everything, they're going to fucking beat us at that, because they have the ability to fucking have state intervention in their markets way greater than we can.
Absolutely. And
the clearest example of this was, when the pandemic hit Wuhan, they built that hospital in like 4 days. It's completely unthinkable in the West, especially in, like America or even Canada for that matter. And that's basically what it is. I mean, they are a neoliberal sort of free market country, but the market is dominated by state-owned enterprises. So it's state capitalism, just basically what it is.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
the basis for a lot of the cinephilia in America is for misinformation. Kind of a weird, like, two-sided coin where people on the left, they hear all the time, oh, China bad, China bad, China bad, China bad. And at the same time, they also hear China communist, China communist, China communist.
Right.
Think, hold the fuck up. Wait a minute. Communism good, actually, in our mind. So, and U.S. actually bad. And U.S. media.
Right.
So everything U.S. tells us wrong. Therefore, China good. And, China might actually be communist. That's why they're actually good and not bad. So I think it's this weird, like,
baby brain binary
reaction. Yeah, definitely.
Well, and this is exactly what I was thinking when the Harper's letter came out and Chomsky was like on it and like finally being like, oh, you know, free speech advocacy. And regardless of what our thoughts are on that specific thing, it struck me that like his outdated view of like the left through all his experience with like anti-communism, not that he was anti-communist, but just like, you know, the new left being like very used to like, you know, the left is like scrappy underdogs against reactionary forces, which is true and not true to an extent, made a lot of these people, especially old timers, blind to the fact that like the call is coming from inside the house. Like the problem exists in the left in a lot of these cases. And so I think that like I see that as such a fundamental issue. And I think that in this case, yeah, like kind of having that reflex of being like, and again, it's founded in fact from the past, but yeah, like, oh, this place is terrible. Oh, also this place is communist. Oh, okay. I get it. But then you talk to these people and you're like, no, but for real, like this isn't, come on. Right? Like, no, but they're actually bad. Who would have thought that the world's more complicated?
Yeah, we've talked about that before, just like the nauseating baby brain binary, where it's just like, oh, you know, and yeah, I've gotten the misinformation thing too for anything I've said critical of China. They'll be like, oh, well, you're buying into, you know, FBI, CIA propaganda. I'm like, you telling me this shit isn't happening? You telling me there's not suicide nets? Are you telling me that there's not Uyghur camps? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, it's out in the open. We already know this shit. Like, but it's just, yeah, it's just why, yeah, like why. Yeah, I guess it's just like, oh, well, it's communist, so it must be good. Like, I have the hammer sickle emoji in my handle, so it must be good. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's just...
This is a Medium article that's like China's not imperialist, and so essentially the reason that they're listing not imperialist is A, they have state-owned industries, and then B, their state actually in conjunction with other states in order to build lasting, mutually beneficial programs and things, right? So that's what I found really interesting, because that's what Siddak was just talking about, and we were talking about with China's little strain of imperialism being a little bit more palatable in the moralist sense, because, you know, they have the government of those countries in their pocket, right? These deals, for instance, like for port cities,
right?
And they can say, well, actually, we're benefiting you.
China is not imperialist because A, the sort of projects are being done by the state, and B, the projects that are being done, again, are being done in conjunction with other governments and with their approval. So I think that's what his definition, like that he read that on a Medium article. I think that's kind of what I could hear was, oh, this is not imperialism, which is, I mean, it's stupid, because I was watching a sort of a documentary about how China is basically, like they have this thing, part of the Belt Road Initiative called the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is like a massive highway that goes from China through all the way from the north of Pakistan to the south in this port city called Gwadar. And we're supposed to help the Pakistanis, but it's not helping the Pakistanis because the people who were constructing the highway were all Chinese workers. There was no Pakistani workers employed with this, so no new jobs for Pakistan. And it's basically they're creating, in the city of Gwadar, they are creating sort of, you know, enclaves of, you know, places where Chinese people can visit. So it's that it's kind of like, you know, the East India Company over and over again.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, 100%. That's pretty well said. I think that, yeah, I don't know. I mean, like it's not quite. It kind of almost sounds like the whole, like, you know, Soviets putting missiles in Cuba sort of thing, like fighting the U.S. back. And I would say to that, honestly, the same thing that I would say to like the Bannons of the world that are like posturing like they're shipping like a war with China is like, you know, we're not really like, it's not really as obvious as that seems, because like, bro, like China makes necessary parts for like all of our battle tanks for the army, right? Like they're not like the whole fucking thing is they're not cut off from the capitalist world anymore. Like it's not a fucking containment battle. It's just fucking taking the fucking world over. And yeah, again, like it's not this international great working towards utopia. It's like, no, we're just going to buy the neighborhood and then have, you know, a vacation resort for where the Chinese people go. That's not good at all. That's not good at all.
Yeah, exactly. I think one of the main differences from the Soviet Cold War is that the Iron Curtain existed as a physical thing, but this sort of new Cold War, so to speak, is literally a battle in the marketplace. That's what it is. It's who can get a bigger market share. So it's a very it's not a physical sort of thing. It's pretty much a neoliberal Cold War. I think that's a better way to describe it, because it's who can get the most market share in each country. And so far, China, I would say, is perhaps winning because it has a market share within America itself. And, you wouldn't be able to imagine that as the Soviets doing something similar. But that's basically what's happening, because not only like obviously you said that China supplies American military parts as well. But I read this opinion piece on China's state-owned media called Xinhua. And it was basically like, oh, we provide a lot of your pharmaceuticals. So if you continue and aggravate the trade war against us, we're probably just going to stop shipping every single medicine we have to you, so your citizens just die. Not because they can't afford anything. It's just that, well, not that they can't afford anything, is because they don't have anything to buy anyway. So it's just like, oh yeah, shit.
Mm-hmm. Right. Like sanctions. Yeah,
exactly. Like sanctions.
I also think just the one thing that occurs to me, and we were just pointing out the obviously all the holes in acting like China's conducting themselves in any kind of moral way. And I've talked plenty about how maybe the basic concepts of applying traditional moral, you need to talk about states in a beyond good and evil sort of way, right? I mean, they're inherently malevolent, right?
Yeah.
But the assumption here that perhaps we will work towards communism, right? We gotta trust the plan, right? Fucking QAnon, but for leftists, trust the plan. Fucking CCP. I swear, guys.
The great coming, the creeper coming.
right. I think one of the things there also though is isn't that kind of idealistic? Because we're gonna get what we need to do in order to have a lasting sobriety is get ourselves physically dependent on crack first, and then I swear to God we'll be fucking lifestyle coaches after that.
The dentist system.
What the fuck are you? The fuck are you talking about? What was that?
You can't sober up unless you shit the bed first.
Right. We're gonna get so dependent on this, and then people are just gonna be loyal to the old plan we had. Are you out of your fucking mind?
Yeah, I think to the degree that it is there was some game like what Siddak was saying about wedging with Russia or whatever. I would prefer the U.S. over China, just because I fear the authoritarianism thing is one thing we should talk about that we haven't talked about, which is another
having guns.
Hell yeah, brother.
Yeah. But it seems like the Dems are a lot of their Biden messaging and all that, and Obama messaging is they're aware of this Cold War, and they say that Trump's protectionism and isolationism is going to leave us out of, they always speak it in competitive terms, China's going to take over and we're going to be left in the cold. But really, it's not about America in general, right? They always conflate that, right? It's just about the American elite. They want to cut in the deal. And that's what TPP was. And that's why I always say Trump's better or harm reduction because he didn't sign the TPP and Hillary would have, and the Dems 100% would have, and they're going to sign more. And, that's how it's just funny that they always frame it we need to be working with them or we need to compete with them. And, they're saying that Trump's against it, but it's clearly for our benefit to protect ourselves and not get involved with them as far as average people, not just the elites in this country.
Yeah, well, we're never gonna fucking get into a serious hot war outside of just skirmishes in the Sea of China, unless I'm totally off fucking base and just amazingly wrong. The fuck is that gonna look like?
We do proxy wars now.
That's what. Proxy wars is probably the maximum it's gonna get to. Yeah,
exactly. My rightoid brother was literally telling me a month or two ago, there's there's fucking sleeper agents in the American population. Like, are you fucking out of your minds? Are you out of your fucking mind? The guy that makes
your new Call of Duty trailer just a bit too early, and he thinks it applies to China.
Right, exactly. No, this is just like Activision's new fucking ad campaign. Like you think the guy that made your fucking dim sum is gonna come to your house and slit your throat, you fucking moron? I actually lose my mind at just the idea of that.
Yeah, he's more likely to spread the China flu to you.
Hey, for real though.
Oh.
I think one of the other things I wanted to mention was the ironic part is that it's actually safer to be a Marxist in the United States than it is to be a Marxist in China, because I think like 2 years ago or something, they imprisoned like a bunch of Marxist students who were like, hey, wait a minute, China is not communist, and they just fucking imprisoned them.
Yeah, because it's illegal to believe in a religion there. Just kidding.
Yeah, this is the thing. Like the Hong Kong protests, like all these leftists, I remember the Radlibs were like, oh, they're astroturf. Oh, they're bullshit. Fuck those Hong Kong protesters. Like, that's what I don't know if you guys saw that. That was the general discourse I saw.
Well, to be fair, it's kind of true, but
I don't know.
We might kind of agree on this.
Yeah, they deserve their freedoms and so on, but at the end of the day, if you're cucking out to the white people or the Americans, then you should probably feel bad for that. Like, okay, fight for your rights, but just don't be like, oh my god, Trump's good, because that's just like, dude, you just posted cringe. That's basically what
that's like tankies here hanging on to China.
Yeah. Well, it might be a zero-sum thing there where it's just like, all right, well, that's better than what will come, if we fully get subsumed by China. And it's just like, especially with their surveillance state that they're already doing now, they're already implementing it. Like, I don't know if it's just buying into, right-wing framing or whatever, but I think they're better off not being part of that, and it's totally understandable that they'd be willing to.
Yeah, I mean, look, the thing about it, just like anything, is that there's like reasonable points on both sides, but like the local government of Hong Kong, from how I understand it, like the party in power in Hong Kong is basically just like explicitly, not just like every other party, is like literally just like businessmen in the city.
Oh yeah, sure.
And Hong Kong exists as a city state just because of colonialism.
Absolutely.
It's not like, as far as the debate they're having there goes, like I can understand not wanting to, be like subsumed by this authoritarian superpower, but like also like I don't want to root for anyone there. I like literally And so then like I see like intelligence warping Western sentiment about it and everything, which is overwhelmingly libertarian. Like that's where I'm just like, okay, I don't like any horse in this race in the first place. And the fact that this is getting publicity makes me think this is a fucking psyop. Fuck every bit of this. And it's totally like Reddit fucks that are like the most into it. So like, fuck that shit. Like I don't want to get involved in that shit. Fuck everyone involved there.
The thing that pissed me off most was like all of the Harry Potter cosplay that was going on in the protests.
Oh,
wait, what?
Harry Potter cosplay?
Yeah, there was like I remember this was like more when it was
liberalization of China.
Yeah, but there was like the Hong Kong protesters like doing American flag stuff and that, and then there was some that would show up in like Harry Potter costumes. It would be like making those sort of like very openly liberal appeals.
You won't believe this. You won't believe this. So right now, I'm not sure if you guys are aware of this. There's protests going on in Thailand as well. Against the monarchy, and it started out as, I kid you not, a Harry Potter themed protest. I'm not kidding.
These people are sick.
It's 100% a psyop. This is 100%.
All right, that's astroturf. Yeah, that's 100% astroturf. You got
me. J.K. Rowling's just like sitting on her computer, like yes.
So they're turfs. All those people, they're turfs. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Fucking J.K. Rowling sitting on her computer at fucking Los Alamos, fucking fed.
Yeah, I mean, Siddak, do you got a lot of time left, or how you good on time?
I have a bit of time left. It's like almost 2 a.m., but it's just like we could like touch on Lebanon and all that stuff, and like we can like go on, but like not too long, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I like 20-ish more minutes. I got to be somewhere.
Yeah, that might actually be perfect because I think that's going to be territory that we're maybe.
No, absolutely.
I mean, speaking for myself,
I'm out of my depth. Yeah.
I Googled Lebanon earlier. I just didn't know what we were even talking about. I was like, just the whole country. Like,
I just started ordering Lebanese food on Seamless. I just got lost. That's as far as I got.
I made it to Grubhub.
No, we don't. That yeah, we're out of our depths. There's not much to talk about there.
I'm sure that like listeners would be totally interested in listening to Siddak explain some of that shit. Just dropping
maybe
some,
like note kind of
drop a bomb.
yeah.
I
What the fuck?
Sorry. Was that too soon? Too soon. Sorry.
Never too soon.
Oh boy.
No, that's a firework, actually.
But yeah, I think if we're touching on Lebanon, I think the basic point of it is just that it's a state that is the ultimate culmination of identity politics, that has basically stalled any real economic development in that country for ages, and it's led to like constitutional crises and like shit ton of civil war debts and so on. So that's basically all it is. I mean, I think basically Lebanon is, for your listeners that don't really know, it's one of the few sort of Levantine/Arab countries. It's north of Israel, one of the few such Arab countries that is like almost roughly halfly divided between Muslims and Christians, and it's a sort of consociational parliamentary republic where it's mandated by the constitution that there must be a certain ratio of Muslims and Christians in parliament. And I think the rule is that the president has to be a Maronite Christian, the prime minister has to be a Sunni Muslim, and the speaker of the house has to be a Shiite Muslim. So like, I think that's how elections work, is like, no matter who you get, like, no matter, who gets elected, the ratio must be according to these identitarian lines. And that's led to, and that's one of the reasons, I think I mentioned this a bit earlier as well, that Lebanon has not had a proper demographic consensus for at least 100 years. 1932 is the last time they had it. So any sort of, ratios of identities you see in the parliament is all based on that 1932 consensus before Lebanon was even a country.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's like they don't want to have another one because it might offend the people, it might screw up the ratios and get another civil war going. That's pretty much the only reason they don't want to have that. But yeah, no, that's basically what's happened. They had I think they had a constitutional crisis in 1958 where the president wanted to be more pro-Western, and the prime minister or the speaker, I can't really remember, wanted to be pro Gamal Abdel Nasser, who was the Arab nationalist / quote unquote socialist at that time. And, he was sweeping the Arab masses all across the Arab world. So there was this massive constitutional crisis, especially because the president was a Christian, and that led to US intervention in Lebanon. And they basically secured the president. And once his term finished, he, got out of power and a new one came, and everyone was like, all right, we'll just forget this ever happened. And then they obviously had that massive ass civil war with Christian Falangist groups and Israel and Hezbollah, and that was another shit show in itself, and of course leading to the assassination of Ravi Hariri. And I think there was a tribunal result as well from the ICC or ICJ about who was responsible for it, because earlier everyone thought it was the Syrians who were occupying the country that was responsible for assassinating their beloved Sunni prime minister, but it was actually Hezbollah. And that's one of the main things. Lebanon does have a conventional army, and after the civil war, Hezbollah was the only other group that was allowed to maintain an army. The Christians had to disband, and the Sunnis had to disband, but the Hezbollah is the only sort of group that still has a mandated army, and it gets free funds from Iran and so on. And that's why a lot of the beef that Lebanon today has with Israel is more because of Hezbollah than it has to do with the state of Lebanon, because I think 87% of Shiites in Lebanon approve of Hezbollah, which is already pretty contentious. So any single conflict that you see between Lebanon and Israel is mostly just Hezbollah-Israel conflict, and the Lebanese people just don't really have much to do with it. And and that's one of the things that the civil war has created a shit ton of refugees. So that's why but especially when I was in high school in Dubai, every single Lebanese person I met had a Canadian passport. And then when I went to university in Canada, every single Lebanese person I met had a Canadian passport. I've never ever, and I swear to God, I've never met any Lebanese person that does not have a Canadian passport or an American passport. It's just, everyone has it. It's crazy because the situation was pretty bad. And that's exactly what's happening right now, because before the explosion in Beirut's port, there was protests with regards to Lebanon's economy, which was, hyperinflation and all of that kind of stuff. So on neoliberal austerity. And that was also like, a result of identity politics, because every single political party that exists, maybe, apart from the Communist Party of Lebanon, is welded in identity politics, because you're not voting for pro-capitalist development, state capitalism, communism, or socialism. You're voting for Sunni, Christian, Shiite. Like, that's basically what you're voting for.
Right. That's crazy.
So you're not addressing any sort of the economic shit that's going on, and that's what the protests were in Lebanon, because they were not only protesting austerity and these sort of neoliberal economics, they were protesting the entire sort of system that's in Lebanon that forces you to vote along sectarian lines. And I think Lebanese identity cards also mention your religion.
Wow.
You have to be one of these religions, and this is something as well that each and every religion, Sunni, Shiite, and Maronite Christian and non-Maronite Christians, they all have different laws for each other.
Holy shit, man. Damn.
Like, Lebanon is like the worst sort of colonial, amalgamation of a so-called nation state, because it's like Lebanon is one of the biggest social constructs that exist as thing. Many of the Christians in Lebanon don't even consider themselves to be Arab. They're like Hoteps, basically saying, "Oh, we was Phoenicians."
Respect.
Solidarity.
They're Phoenician Hoteps. The Shiites love Hezbollah, and the Sunnis are like, we don't know what the fuck we're doing. And it's basically just like, it's an absolute god-tier shit show. And do I think Lebanon as a country is going to collapse anytime soon? Probably not. But like, if it'll only happen if this identitarian mess doesn't get resolved. And that's basically what happened as well. Like, the government entirely resigned as well. So that's like, Lebanon is just basically a horrible, horrible shit show. No sort of economic ideology guiding them, just a bunch of identitarian elites looting the country. And basically anyone who could manage to flee fled and got a Canadian passport. That's basically what it is.
Wow, that's another level of identity politics. I mean, I can't imagine here if there's like a Catholic primary and a Protestant primary. That's fucking
He's full of
insane.
sickos.
There's basically like, two conclusions to three conclusions, I would say, to identity politics. One is obviously Hitler. Second is that's like a more like white nationalist, ethno-nationalist one. The second is Lebanon, which is like a post-colonialist sort of identity politics. And the third is Pakistan, which is a mixture of both of them. Because I think I tweeted this like a couple of days back. Pakistan said, we will nuke India, but we will ensure that our nukes miss Muslims and only hit like everyone else. And
I'm like, I saw you post about that. I was like, holy shit. Targeted harassment. That's crazy.
It's a big mess. Like Pakistan as a state is basically just their intelligence service and their military keeping like nuclear weapons alive. That's basically all it is. Their form of asymmetric warfare is just funneling terrorists into India. And Afghanistan as well. So like, that's their soft power is terrorism. That's Pakistan for you. But going back to Lebanon, it's just the natural conclusion of identity politics, just sectarianism. And like, when you have these sort of diversity quotas, it kind of eerily reminds me of Lebanon, because all it does is distracts you. It literally is meant to distract you from class politics and reinforce identitarian clashes to sort of desecrate whatever is left of the nation and the community. And that's basically all it is.
So regardless if they're the Sunni leader or the Shia representative, like, they're still just neolib, right? They're just still...
Yeah, they're still neolibs, and that's one of the things that happened when Emmanuel Macron visited Beirut, because Lebanon used to be a French protectorate under the League of Nations after the dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. Basically, he's like, oh yeah, this is what you guys should be doing. We should be doing it responsibly. And he was trying to act like, we should gain control. And there was I think the people of Lebanon were so fed up that I'm not sure if it was this petition came from Lebanon or from the Lebanese diaspora, but it was basically a petition saying, petition to ask France to take control over Lebanon again. And I'm like,
just recolonization, but as just a market actor now, like just cyclical.
Let's go back.
Jesus Christ!
Damn, that really sounds nightmarish. So you're saying things were already bubbling. There's all this global. There's just been global unrest in recent years. With the whole neoliberal order falling apart, and so you're saying that this was already bubbling up, and then this bomb was the thing that really tipped it over. And
precisely, this explosion, pretty much tipped it
Right.
over. But like it was obviously happening from beforehand as well. But this one was the one that was like, this is probably not going to work. So, I mean, are there protests in Lebanon? Yeah, like if you see videos of vigils being held, there are obviously protests still happening in Lebanon, because the entire capital city got decimated to bits. It was probably the strongest explosion since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So obviously, people are pissed because there's this tanker and like a silo facility that's just been completely derelict, and it fundamentally speaks to neoliberalism because the state just stopped giving a shit about its own port, and voila, here you have it, an explosion.
so it's confirmed now that it was an accident.
Yeah, like it was a ship. I mean, obviously, I think there's a degree of psyop involved to it, because why would I think it was a Moldovan. I'm not wrong, a sort of a ship that had a shit ton of ammonium nitrate, and the company just like apparently went bankrupt and just left the ship there for months, and the Lebanese Port Authority just like didn't give a shit about it as well.
Wow.
So there's definitely a level of psyop involved here, but yeah.
Yeah, I kind of had assumed that it was just like Israel or something.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, I thought it was Israel or somebody.
The rightists were like, oh, it's definitely Hezbollah weapon facilities,
Right,
and like
right.
the PSYOP gang was like, oh, it's definitely the Zionists, but it was just neoliberalism.
Wow. You pull off the mask at the end, and it's neoliberal capitalism.
Who would have guessed it?
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Yeah, you want to talk about negative externalities? Jesus Christ, that's fucked.
I'm really tired of the twist ending of every episode just being neoliberal austerity in the end. This is really starting to get annoying.
You're telling me it's not the Jews. You're telling me.
I'll have some pushback on that one.
Yeah, I'm gonna push.
Oh boy. Oh man,
my gosh.
I can cut that if you want, but yeah. Yeah, that's pretty good spot to end it at. Was there anything else you guys wanted to say, or?
I mean, I'm good. I think it was awesome having Siddak on. This is a really great conversation. I thought.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Pretty lighthearted and informative at the same time. This was pretty fun. Yeah, I love it. Pretty good.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
Yeah, it was great, Siddak. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
And anytime you want to come back on, more than happy.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, hell yeah! I'll write some new hot takes and a bunch of like retarded articles, and then let's try to get back together and own the libs.
Hell yeah! On my desk by Tuesday morning.
You wanna drop your at and plug anything?
Yeah. So my Twitter at is that's my full name, Siddak Ahuja, SIDDAK. AHUJA, and yeah, I stopped making YouTube videos for a while, but I'm thinking I'm probably going to restart soon.
Nice.
But I'm still writing articles and still, shit tweeting and triggering the libs and triggering the left. So
Doing the work.
doing the work. That's what it is. That's what it is.
Word. So we'll link your article in the app and all that. But yeah, this is great. Next time there's a global crisis, we're hitting you up. We're going to do another episode. Emergency episode.
Global correspondent.
Yeah. You're our international correspondent.
All right, word. All right, have a good night, man. Thanks for coming on.
You have a great one.
Sleep.
Peace.
All right, peace, guys.
Take care, guys.